So basically, men today in the Western society are very disposable material. Women don't really need men for long. Complete strong war on masculinity these days in the Western countries. Weakening of men, weakening of masculinity, shaming of men and masculinity. It's a very strong aspect of what's happening in the Western world. And recently, the same aspect captured the Slavic nations as well. That the Slavic men predominantly are targeted because they are the least controllable and obedient people in the world today. Today I want to talk about quite deep subject which talks about why the Muslim world and Islam is thriving around the world while the Western countries are collapsing. It will be very in-depth conversation. Stay till the end and support the channel. It's time for you to create life according to your rules. CLATYR, create life according to your rules. That for the West, for the Western countries, the developed world, considered developed, to continue growth and prosperous, people need to replicate. They need to reproduce. Yeah, reproduce the right word. But today, in the society, everything is being done that the reproduction is a privilege for the minority. Only small number of people in society can allow themselves the privilege to reproduce and be educated and raise healthy children psychologically, mentally, and physically. Because again, we see that many poor people that a lot of the time not educated and they're not in the position, yeah, and the maturity and the position to raise healthy children. And I mean, they're not in a financial situation, they're not having a house, they don't have the support, the community, the psychological maturity and stability themselves to raise children, because the world today it's not easy place to be, and they still bring in many children. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of the children have a lot of issues themselves, because the parents are not in the position actually to have the children. That's why I'm kind of focusing on minority in the society, because eventually if a child needs to grow and eventually contribute to society financially, creatively, you know, instead of, you know, making crime and actually take away from society. So for example, if people going on the streets and assaulting others, they're a burden to society, they're making bad things. And of course, we cannot judge them while they're doing what they're doing, because the reasons why they're not obeying the law or behaving like this coming early on, from the beginning, from the upbringing, from the family, and from sometimes the parents who didn't know how to treat them and raise them properly. That's why I'm emphasizing that raising healthy children, it's a right in this world today that left only for very privileged people. And actually everything is being done that this privilege will be left only for the minority. of people today. And that's the sad truth. So when people are being raised and educated, yes, they completely understand what are the chances to bring and raise healthy children in the world today. For example, if you take the average 20 years old male that growing up in New Zealand or Australia, and he sees that his chance buying a house is 0, and he needs to live in the city and flat the house with 10 more people, or live in a boarding house, and his chance to get into relationship if a woman he desires or he sees as attractive or someone that he considers his level is also very low. So what is chances actually to reproduce? And yes, I agree, usually in nature there was big amount of men that never reproduced because they couldn't win this evolution game. But similarly happening these days, similarly happened these days, but even today it's way harder that was happening back then, because back then, if a woman was chosen a man, let's say had children with them, so the women kept with this man, because without this man, their chances of survival were really low. But today, women don't need to keep the man after they got the children, because in the Western society, the substitute for men is the government, is the organizations, is the benefit system. Women can go and work. And if women need some kind of physical contact, that to answer their biological needs, it's very easy for them. So basically, men today in the Western society are very disposable material. Women don't really need men for long. And that's the saddest truth. So what's happening a lot of the times, women these days or prefer not to have children at all, or they're having these children very late, or if they're having these children, maybe they will have one child most of the time. 2, less likely. 3. And of course, the system and the laws and everything is made that eventually these children will stay with the female and not with the dad. We all understand that the system is made in favor of women mainly. And the reason is that women in the Western society are kind of the agents. They are agents of the system. Because, again, there is a complete strong war on masculinity these days in the Western countries. Weakening of men, weakening of masculinity, shaming of men and masculinity. It's a very strong aspect of what's happening in the Western world. And recently, the same aspect captured the Slavic nations as well. So similarly, what was happening in the West, the Slavic nations learned the strategy, adopted it, and doing the same thing. And it's very, very sad. In the Western world, we have society that's shrinking. Society that's shrinking because in order for society to grow, they need to have families. They need to have at least 3, most of the time, and 2 children per family. But what's happening today? Everything, all the circumstances are made that this goal won't happen. And of course, if you will do a major research, you will understand everything is done by purpose. It's built by purpose. You see all these prices that are going up and up everywhere, the insane prices for houses, the greed of people who have 20, 40, 50 houses, the divide between the rich and the poor, the boomers and Generation Z. All this done by purpose. So, all those things are made for the goal of population reduction.
This equation has 4 factors, a little bit of multiplication. So you've got a thing on the left, CO2, that you want to get to 0. And that's going to be based on the number of people, the services each person's using on average, the energy on average for each service, and the CO2 being put out per unit of energy. So let's look at each one of these and see how we can get this down to 0. Probably one of these numbers is going to have to get pretty near to 0. That's back from high school algebra. But let's take a look. First, we've got population. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, health care, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
Because in the age of artificial intelligence, actually most people won't be needed these days. But also our financial system built in a way that it needs to collapse, because it's also built on some kind of fake promise on money that doesn't exist, when the banks and the governments can print how much money they want, while the rest not asking the question how is that made and just playing the game. While someone is becoming rich on behalf of lots of other people become very poor. This is how the system works. Shortly, if you don't understand how the banking system works, there is fractional reserve system. In the past, the money that was in the bank was backed by gold. But then they decided now the money is not backed by anything. So it means if the bank has $100, it can lend, I think, $10,000, like 8 times or 10 times, I don't remember the numbers, but the bank can lend 10 times more the money it has for others. It means if I put $100 in the bank can lend $900 to other people. And then, of course, these people supposed to pay with interest back. Now, wait a second, if only $100 in the system, in circulation, from where the other people supposed to pay the interest? And that's the problem, and that's what's called inflation. That's why money is depreciating, because there is a lot of money, a lot of debt that never going to be returned, never, because it's impossible, because there is no the physical money that can be returned to the bank. That's why this system is prone to collapse someday. And what's happening today, what the Reserve Bank is doing, they're just trying to save the system and make it like, you know, on breathing life support. That's basically what they're doing. And what most of you are doing, working for pennies. Right? You can see that, you know, the pay of, let's say, of the governor or the manager of the Reserve Bank, his wage is, I think, $700,000 per year or $1 million per year, something like that. It's ridiculous, insane wages. While most people need to live on $50,000 per year minus taxes, which is nothing. you understand that everything is made that your life will be hard these days. Of course, you're welcome not to continue to watching my videos, but I cannot live in the world without understanding what is really actually happening around the world and why certain things don't work. And this, in order to create life according to your rules, you really need to understand what kind of world you're living in. Where unfortunately, when you were growing up and you showed this like fairy tales and all these pink stories that you show for children, this is completely the opposite of what's happening in the world. In my opinion, we're living in the world that is mostly prone to be than heaven. Because there are different worlds, there are endless worlds in the galaxies, you know, the universe is endless, it's huge. And I'm sure there are a lot of life forms and universes and earths that life is way better than closer to heaven than what's happening here. So basically the bad and the evil will thrive way more strongly than the good forces. That's why you see in movies, they're trying to convince you that, oh, the hero always wins, it will have a good end. Unfortunately, in the world that we live in Earth, the evil actually stronger than the light forces. And I see what's happening around the world. I have also my own experience of the things that happen to me as well. And it's completely opened my eyes where I'm at, where I'm living, what kind of world it is. Yeah? So coming back to the Western society, so we can understand if we live in society that actually families are not growing up and communities and people are divided, people are lonely. And also I can see a lot from the comments that, yeah, it's not like I'm as an East European or immigrant feeling alone, but there are hundreds of thousands of Kiwi men that feeling the same. I'm sure 100%. And yes, I agree, it's probably not of me being a migrant here, no. I'm also a voice to millions of men, not only in New Zealand, but around the Western world, that feeling the same and trying to find some kind of solution to the trap they are in the society that they are growing up, where they see, oh, there is actually no point. Like you have in Japan, the hikikomori. It's actually majority of the men that actually they grew up in Japan, and so like after school, okay, what the future is going to look like and what they need to do and accomplish and what are the rules of the society. They said, nah, I'm not going to participate, I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to work, I'm not going to study. Screw that, that's not for me. And they stay in for the rest of their lives in the room and basically not going out. And maybe they do something online and that's it, that's all their life. And I don't judge them and I understand, because the alternative is probably not better. Yes? They don't see any hope in future, and probably majority of them are basically right. Of course, there is hope, there is options, but with the years they're getting smaller and smaller, the options, the opportunity. So if we're looking at what's happening in the world now, and probably some of you told me, oh, the loneliness and the separation happened because of COVID and everything. Well, what's happened during the pandemic, it was a test of the elite for obedience. They wanted to check if we put people in the conditions of we had, we want to see how people will actually behave between each other, where we are at. So basically it was societal experiment for majority of it is for obedience. And if you need to do an overview around the world, where were the least obedient people? Well, New Zealand was one of the most very obedient people in the world. But which countries been the least obedient and actually triggered warning signs for the elite? Aha! Probably start to understand why in Ukraine and Russia is happening. Because they had the lowest vaccination rates and the lowest rates of obedience in the world. And why I'm talking about that? If we connecting that to the Islam, we've seen these days religion is fading away. People are getting less and less and less and less religious. And again, going to church, it doesn't mean people are religious. You know, women can go to church, but eventually they won't have kids, they won't treat their husband in the best way like before, and maybe they will even have an OnlyFans account, but they still go to church. So that means the society that teaches men and women today is actually get further away from any religious values. And again, I'm not saying religion it's something, it's a good invention that solved the problem of the world. It's fading away because of good reasons. It's actually, people began to understand that religion is not the savior. And actually, religion, it's a strong control mechanism with specific rules and traditions. Some of the rules are not really healthy or align somehow biologically with who we are. It's not a recipe for happiness. It's again, it's a control mechanism. When people are under strong religion, they again obedient under the rules of that specific religion. That's how it works. But when the Western world went further away from religion and received and have no basically guide how to operate in this life, people became a bit lost, because actually, yeah, there is no kind of guide or a pathway how to prevail and live fine in this life, because people are grew up on false information around them, which doesn't really work. It doesn't give them the truth of what's happening and why is it happening, and people begin to be more and more confused each time. So instead of religion, you got false sources of information like most of the media, which actually give 10% truth, 90% not truth. And then based on that, people are making their decisions and behavior in life. Yeah? So what's happening next? If the media succeeds to take control of the mind of people, so we are fine. But then there are people who reading the picture, connecting the dots and understanding what's happening, and not really fall into what's happening, yeah, into the deceptions. Those people are, unfortunately these days, are minority. I think I'm also one of them, and that's one of the main reasons I have no much friends, because again, the aim of the elite to separate people, like not only me and people who understand what's happening, but also generally to separate people, because even people who don't understand what's happening, they also feel alone, lonely, separated. And when we separate between people, and people are not united, control is easy. And that's basically the aim of the elite today. Like why we have billionaires around the world while you have endless people on the streets, yeah? And have their billions. It's not by chance. They told you stories that they managed and got everything by their own hands, by themselves. But look at Elon Musk. Does he look to you like a smart person? No, he just was chosen to represent a role. That's it. There is nothing you can do in the world that you can be Elon Musk if you're not chosen. That's the reality. You just need to be chosen. That's it. And the other people just playing a show. That you vote for them and believe that they just, again, chosen people who run in a show and you actually believe to what's happening. So how it's connected to the Islam? These days, as you can understand, the world in the Islam is completely different to the Western world. And in Islam, people are still reproducing, even though it's got lower, not because of their social conditions and behaviors and psychological conditions. No, it's because, mostly, my opinion, it's because of health reasons, but they are reproducing. And as you probably heard, they're taking control of Europe, and all this Europe invasion of Muslims, it's done by purpose, yeah? So from the taxpayer money of the people in Europe, specifically also in the UK and Germany and other places, they've been brought groups of Muslim migrants that have strong Sharia laws and religious faith in the Islam that are not considering the local rules at all, and all of that is permitted by the authorities, you know, while people in Britain are living on the streets and barely getting by. Those people, illegal migrants, living in big hotels.
Yes, and protesters against the asylum seekers being here, who've been taking to the streets for the last few weeks, who were jubilant last week when this interim injunction was granted, meaning the asylum seekers would have to be out by the end of next week. Well, they no doubt will feel angry at this decision by the Court of Appeal. It was quite a lengthy decision, but found flaws essentially in what the High Court judge had ruled, essentially saying that the residents here in Epping, their fear of crime had properly been taken into account. He said he agrees it's relevant, but clearly outweighed by the undesirability of incentivising protests. Now, essentially what the judge was saying there was that while Epping Council had partly argued that they wanted the asylum seekers out to stop the protests happening here, what this judge was saying was, well, effectively that worked if that interim injunction had gone ahead and the asylum seekers had been moved out, and therefore that would incentivise protests in other parts of the country, as indeed we've already been seeing.
Why is that? Because all this is done by the government. And as you can understand, and same you see happening in Australia, the Muslim population getting higher and bigger, and basically the elite wants that the Muslim world will replace the Anglo-Saxon culture and the English people. They want to replace you. They want to replace you, and that's what they're doing. Because what's happening if you in the Western world won't have 2 or 3 children, yeah? If the women won't compromise, won't choose the average man and stay with him and raise a family, and the fertility rate of the country will go above 2.1, but now they need go above 3 or 4 because of what's happening with the immigration from countries that are not related to them, and also regards the Muslim world. So what's happening? You are getting replaced. Simple as that. Because if they're reproducing and they bring in their a religion, strong Muslim religion, and a lot of you are getting fewer and fewer because you're not reproducing, and men see no future. Men are getting weak and they are obedient, and the women are way stronger, and they have maybe one child or not any child at all, and they are the man and the woman in the relationship. So basically, the Western society is going to collapse in a few years. And it's already in a lot of places, it's collapsing. And you see the Islam communities are growing and growing, yeah? So the rules of life for women in the Islamic world, if you take Afghanistan, women basically can't do anything. They can't even go outside and go to the public toilet without male permission. And again, I'm not saying that is the right way to do things, but the thing is they are still reproducing. And that's extreme way of things. But women these days are very empowered and strong, and males are very weakened and have no much influence and very obedient. And we saw how obedient people are during the experiment in 2020, 2022. And that's why we see the society today, in the Western society, is going basically to extinct. And the Muslim society, in a few years, is going to take over Europe, and in the future also Australia, and also in the future New Zealand as well, if nothing is going to change. And in my opinion, nothing will change, and we will live in a Muslim world. So the question is, why the elite interested in the Muslim world? Why they want to promote Muslims around the world? So, for example, these days, yes, if we take Saudi Arabia, they have, I think, the least amount of women in the reproductive age compared to men. So you have big majority of men and not enough women to reproduce. And also because it's quite hard to get a woman for average man over there, mostly the sheikhs are having several wives, yeah? So that means you have a lot of men that are not reproducing, and also the situation there is quite hard. And that's why you have in Egypt these cases where white women are getting and then been taken to places like that. This is very, very sad. So that the man over there will have a wife and eventually will reproduce against her will. If we'll have the Muslim world and very strong rules around life, these people eventually quite obedient to the Islam. So they can be controlled by the sheikhs. And that's what actually the elite wants. But if we look in the experiment, what happened with the Slavic nations, where they've been really out of control when there was a lockdown, and they said, okay, you can't open the restaurant, so they closed the restaurant in the front, but at the back, they brought people in that nobody will see. You understand the wisdom of the Slavic people? So that's why we see that the Slavic men predominantly are targeted, because they are the least controllable and obedient people in the world today. The least. So, and you're saying, oh, wait a second, but the women also had this lockdown, and they also didn't have this high vaccination rate. Yes, that's correct, but the female nature eventually adapts to the circumstances and the conditions and the rules of the place they are, if they need to survive. It means if there is a war in Ukraine and they went to Europe, they will marry European men and somehow will adjust to this reality. But men won't. Men need their own, bubble and sense of understanding and purpose, But women can adjust. This is their biologically hardwired how to do it. So that's why women and children are not targeted. So that's the sad reality. Why I believe is the hardest life today is actually for Slavic male around the world. And of course, I'm not saying that for other men around the world it's easier. It's also hard. And that's what we see in society today. So I hope that will be, what I said now, it will be revealing to people. They will make something about it. And I have quite low expectations that the change will come from women around the world. Eventually, in order to change, we need strong men that will be able to push the changes. And unfortunately, the divide today is so big that I don't see how that can fix itself. So we're going to live in 20, 30 years from now, probably in very Islam-dominated world. I don't know if UK is going to be English and exist. I don't know what will happen with Japan. I think New Zealand will be mostly, I guess, Maori and Chinese and Indian. This is a really high chance. And yeah, that's unfortunately the future. So that's why, as long as now you actually somehow can live, at least enjoy something, because you have some kind of freedom at least to travel and do stuff. I didn't even touch about what AI is going to do and take all the jobs, and we'll have, everything by digital ID and all these things. I didn't even talk about that. But today I just wanted to touch base mostly about what's happening in society from men and women perspective. Stay strong. Love you all. Have a good day. It's time for you to create life according to your rules. CLATYR. Create life according to your rules.